Hello and welcome to another In Conversation With. In this video we are in conversation with a luthier and all-round good guy, Alex Bishop, who's based here in England in Bristol. This conversation is wide-ranging. In fact, it's so wide-ranging there are actually two parts to it. So this is part 2 of this video, where we're going to go even more in depth to the aesthetics of guitar making and buying guitars and the ideas around guitars. So, to this conversation with Alex Bishop. Going off this question and then diving into some more sort of nerdy fine details of guitar making. So looking to the future, are there any new guitar building techniques or design ideas you're excited to explore?
Oh, yeah.
Is there anything cutting edge that you're like, ooh, yeah, I want to give that a go?
Yeah, cutting edge. I think structured sides are very fashionable at the minute.
Okay.
So that's kind of, it's a little bit like the double top idea, but for the sides, because rather than linings on the corners, it's almost like a lining throughout the core of the whole side structure.
What's the gap? Is there a gap between it and the outside, or?
Yeah, so there's a lamination on either side of these kind of full depth linings, basically. So your total side thickness is going to be about 5 or 6 millimeters, depending on how you do it.
Yeah.
But kind of with a hollow, well, not a hollow core, but
because that does sound interesting, because it implies that there might be some sort of extra vibration or
maybe
resonance.
I think the idea, the way most makers seem to do the structured sides is they're incredibly stiff.
Okay.
So there's 2 ways of looking at building an acoustic guitar, in my mind, and that is really stiff back and sides, a bit like a snare drum, and then a lively top, and then a lot of the energy is kept in the top.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, that's the old classical way of doing it. You know,
that's a totally legitimate way. My approach is different to that. I like to make the whole instrument as lightweight as possible, and that's to do with my desire to get the back and sides to do some of the talking. So rather than stiffen the back and sides up and kind of lose the character of the wood on the back and sides a bit, I like to just get the whole thing vibrating. And yeah, both ways are totally valid. But I'd love to experiment with the structured sides because you get a really clean look to it. And there's no linings. Everything just goes on top. So a lot of makers I'm seeing doing that. I really love that approach. But I also am dying to build a kind of museum piece, harp guitar, and really, inject a lot of creativity into it.
Yeah.
I'm in love with the work of makers like Michihiro Matsuda, who just is a real he's a brilliant representation of makers that treat this as an art form and bring their own personality to the table, and that's what I want people to take from my work. So harp guitar on its way. No,
seriously. Well, there are a lot of people that play harp guitar. It's a big industry, but it's a big sort of genre as well. Okay, interesting. What about other makers that inspire you?
Well, definitely Michi Matsuda. I love his work. A lot of the Somogyi apprentices are really, doing interesting stuff. I love the work of Julian Gaffney. His work is just beautiful, and he's also got that thing about his instruments where you can see it's his work straight away. So I like my guitar makers like I like my music. I want to hear them and see them and what they bring to the table. And in the Gypsy jazz guitar world, one of my heroes is Michael Dunn, who's based out in Canada somewhere. But he comes from the Spanish guitar making tradition. He kind of cut his teeth in Spanish guitar workshops and then brought those skills back over to where he's from, but builds Gypsy jazz guitars. So he's kind of brings loads of creativity and ideas. He's not afraid to do something that no one's seen before.
Yeah, and that feeds into your art and the culture that you're sort of cooking up here because you're mixing that with all the British tone words and your ideas and your engineering background as well. So that's what makes it special, I think, and that's where your craftsman and your art comes in and alive.
Yeah, definitely. For me, the kind of love of craftsmanship as a thing in itself and treating it like an art form, for me, craft is a bit of an interesting word because you get beer companies, craft beer. It's an important word to be associated with for a lot of companies, but for me it's a way of life, and it's something that feeds our kind of humanity, really. We're a species that comes from making things. It's what we do. So it's just such an important thing for me to share and to inject in my work. and to kind of highlight how important it is to make things in an age of, you know, computers and artificial intelligence. We've got to keep that alive.
Yeah, no, I'm all for it. Okay, so we're back. We're going to dive into some really nerdy questions here. Okay.
Love it.
Good. Okay, single versus double top. Where do you stand?
Crikey. Well, I've not made any double tops, so I feel like my opinion might not be valid.
Oh, okay.
As a huge fan of innovation, though, and you know, I just think it's great trying different things. The innovation is really important, so I think their idea is not to be kind of left. It's when it comes to tradition, things like solid tops and things like that, it's important to tend the embers, don't worship the ashes. So I think innovation's important, but I know that the classical guitar world can be a little more conservative than the steel string world.
The question is single top or double top just for sound, because you know when you buy a concert guitar, you're literally buying it for that projection. That's why you spend 10,000 sort of pounds on a guitar, not just obviously for a handmade crafted piece that's meant to look good, but is also meant to project. The person that's doing it knows this is going to be used on stage, and so it needs a certain volume.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of what you're paying for when you get a handmade guitar is essentially trusting the maker to walk a little bit closer to the edge of the precipice in terms of the, you know, the structural stability of the instrument. In order to get that projection, you know, whether it's a steel string guitar. I mean, the gypsy jazz world is very much about projection as well. You know, there's a lot of acoustic environments that these guitars get used in. So yeah, the maker is there to get that guitar in the Goldilocks zone where it's not going to collapse and rip itself apart with the string tension, but it's going to be matched up perfectly with the pressure on the top and the construction of the top. And if the way you get there is a double top, great. And if not, that doesn't matter either. It's the proof's in the pudding at the end of the day.
Yeah, of course. Cutaways, fan or not a fan?
Oh, I love a cutaway on a guitar, but I have noticed with the folk guitars that I build, steel string folk guitars, I suppose. I think this is true largely of any guitar. I think the cutaway can detract from the sound a bit. But obviously, you benefit in other ways.
Yeah, sure. Access. I mean, I have to say, as I've got older and I've had to play more difficult music, cutaway is starting to look so much. There's some days where there's certain pieces where you just got to go up onto 15th and 17th fret, and so in order to get around that bout, you've got to go down and low, and it's not that comfortable, especially when you're moving at speed. So, some days I'm like, my kingdom for a cutaway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of asymmetrical shapes, asymmetrical bracing patterns. I think they generally, funnily enough, benefit the sound, but there's something about reducing the overall sort of air volume of the instrument will change the sound. Okay, so that has a massive impact on that then as well. Yeah, I think by just taking that chunk out, it's interesting. My theory, and I've seen this in the instruments that I've made and that my students have made, is generally the smaller a guitar gets, it can tend to project really well, but the tone of it, the kind of quality of the sound narrows more and more. So steel string parlour guitars are just really pokey, quite punchy instruments, but they're really small. Whereas jumbos, which are described as the whispering giants, have less volume than you'd expect, but there's a complexity to the sound that's really nice, and there's a kind of bigger harmonic output from the instrument. So that's how I think about cutaways in terms of the sound. Actually, that's a really great thing, because I mean that's just a real tip for anybody there. The smaller the guitar, the louder it's going to sound, but the less you're losing when you go for that. Whereas the bigger the guitar, you've got more nuanced. Definitely, that would be my summary of the way the size, the physical size of the instrument affects the sound, be it adding or taking away cutaways. But there's also, you can compensate with that addition of the cutaway. You could compensate by increasing the depth of the body, the width of the ribs. So this is the kind of fun thing about working with a luthier, is you can kind of have these conversations. Well, if you really want that cutaway, there's something we can do about it that is not going to compromise the sound so much. All right, now I'm a big believer in this, and I love your
logo. Your logo is very unique. Okay,
Cool.
so and I think that's one of the that's a great thing. That's what you want. I mean, because you put it on the headstocks as well, don't you? And that stands out, and that's a fantastic thing. What about other design sort of features, rosettes, anything else that's Alex Bishop that just screams Alex Bishop?
Oh, I mean,
Alex Bishop was here.
I'd love to say that I think other makers, if I'm honest, are really successful at kind of showing their identity in every instrument. Sometimes when I look at my back catalogue, I think, wow, the artist in me has got a bit carried away because there's a lot of different ideas. I suppose for me, though, it's the kind of Art Deco geometric ideas. So a lot of my rosettes are kind of asymmetrical, segmented, with kind of intersecting lines. And that partly comes from building guitars that are tied to the sort of Art Deco era. So I suppose these little Art Deco inlays are kind of where I think my identity lays. Obviously I do gypsy jazz guitars a lot as well.
It's all part of that 1920s sort of style, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And there's other little features that I think are kind of Alex Bishop on the inside. A lot of my bracing is quite narrow and pointed. If you want to see the signature of a maker, just look at the way they carve their braces, because no two makers do it one way. Yeah. And it's going to have an effect on sound, but I think as well, it's like the kind of signature.
So you said you've done lattice lace sort of bracing before. What are you doing? What is your sort of standard? Is it
totally depends on the model? Okay. I've done lattice for a couple of nylon strung guitars that were kind of jazz guitars, I suppose, but flat tops, lattice braced. So I don't really have a standard for nylon.
What do you think? What do you think is the difference between the lattice? Because the lattice is that is an innovation. That really is an innovation, especially like you said with the carving and where they carve it out and all the rest of it. Yeah, makes a huge difference to that. But what does the lattice add that maybe the earlier bracings didn't, or the standard bracings?
Well, I think if you're combining it with the double top, that really thin top, it's a bit. The kind of parallel is think of a banjo has got an incredibly thin soundboard basically, and you get a very powerful but quite bright sound. So my understanding and kind of experience is that the kind of lightweight but lattice braced tops are quite punchy and bright, and the more conventional tops have not quite the same projection but a kind of richness in tone. Okay. I feel like every decision in guitar making, there's always a trade-off. You what you gain in one thing, you lose in another. It's just how you set the levers.
Are there any advancements in guitar building techniques or materials that you're particularly excited about and that you might influence your future creations? Or maybe there's advancements you don't want, that you're ignoring.
Possibly. There's so much going on. Yeah. I mean, the thing with social media is the access to what other makers are doing. Yeah. It's just is open. People are sharing their creations. So ideas are spreading around the world so quick. And I think really the last kind of 20 years of guitar making, the sort of time that I've been operating in guitar making, has been just an amazing era for... I mean, it's a player's market, I'll tell you. There's so many amazing ideas and amazing luthiers out there. I think that what stands out to me, when I look at guitars that pass through this workshop that are, decades old, that I'm working on for repairs and things, the thing that I see in today's guitars is just the level of craftsmanship is through the roof. And I think that is so exciting, because I think the way that the guitar is crafted, just the quality of the joinery and all of that, is a huge influence on the sound of it. I would probably put that close to probably second to the design of the instrument in terms of the quality of the sound. So I think if I was to aspire to anything, it's just to kind of elevate the craftsmanship to the highest possible level. I guess I'd love other luthiers to look at my work and be intimidated. I'm building guitars for guitarists, but I think to kind of find methods and ways of kind of really pushing the craftsmanship as far as possible is what I'm interested in. And I guess technology, like not using CNC and computers to do the work, but to actually assist in the kind of jig making and idea creation is something that I want to explore.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of videos where they're testing as well, where the guys are hooking the guitars up and they're testing, and then they're filing down and testing some more and filing down. So
definitely.
as a player, I kind of look at it and go, how much of the computer is going to really pick up what your ears are hearing, especially if you've had enough experience with it. So
yeah, the problem with kind of measuring guitars and deflection tests and things like this is what people hear is subjective, and what they like the sound of is subjective. So even if you're aiming for certain goals and certain measurements, whether somebody is going to like it, it's like, if you're going to like a curry that I've made, it depends on what kind of curry you like. I mean, it's...
And how hot you like it as well. I mean, the spice is everything.
Exactly. So, yeah, that's a whole world.
Okay, so I mean, just to round us off here, and this is a big question. Okay, I'm going to warn you ahead of time. Okay. What is your philosophy? What represents you in your guitars?
I think it's the fact that if you see all my guitars lined up, they're all different. That's what I want to kind of communicate. And that every instrument I make is a one-off creation and sounds different to all of the rest. I think if that's one thing that I want to put out and demonstrate in my philosophy of guitar making, it's that each guitar should have its own voice, because every player should have their own voice. So that's what I'd like to sort of shine through. Kind of what I was saying earlier about using different woods and getting the sound of that wood to come through is what my instruments are all about. So I'd love for somebody to pick up one of my guitars, and if they have that instant connection, it's for them, because they can forget about the rest. It just speaks to them. That's what I'd love. So just the look, the materials, the sound, and the feel of it is one of a kind. That's what it's all about for me. And when it comes to making commissions for people, the challenge for me is to kind of say, right, what is that person after, and how can I make it, and how can I get there? Yeah. So succeeding at that as much as possible is my goal.
Fantastic. Alex, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it.
Pleasure.
You can grab Alex's stuff and his links down below or up above. That's been the Daily Dose of Luthier 6-string inspiration. Thank you very much for staying until the end. This has been brought to you by Classical Guitar Rocks.